Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very pleasure to welcome you to our new event format, DJW Spot On. And we are pleased and honored to have you with us. With DJW, with the Deutsch-Japanischer Wirtschaftskreis, with the Nichidoku Sangyo Kyokai, you're of course very used to pursuing networking, information and business on a quite wide variety of platforms. And you're used to jointly shape our activities and therefore to foster the Japanese-German bilateral exchange. And with our DJW Spot On, we will dive into an even more intensified dialogue because many of you asked for it, because politics, business, and economy asked for it as well. We will listen to opinions, we will discuss positions, and of course, we will try to find ways of common solutions. Each Spot On will focus on one topic that is of interest for our two countries, for Germany and Japan. We will approach this topic in a dialogue, and we will be inviting two discussion partners each to each dialogue. For the start of the series, it was almost very obvious that we choose the topic of the elections. That we look at the status quo, that we explore how both new possible governments will shape our bilateral relationship, what aspects will they have to be focusing on to make our relations fit for the future. We will approach this topic, elections, today on three levels. With an inward look, we will have the bilateral look at each other, and we will have the global perspectives of the European-Asian interdependencies. And what could be better for us, ladies and gentlemen, than to discuss the election results and the potential future, the forecasts with two top journalists. Two journalists who are very passionate about Europe, about Asia, of course about Japan and about Germany, and who will follow their who have been following their common path in the present and with questioning and very watchful eyes. We are extremely happy today to welcome Nicole Bastian and Dr. Shogo Akagawa. Both of you, of course, known to you by name, and I take the liberty of introducing their stories and their connection to and with Japan and Germany. Dr. Shogo Akagawa began his career as a journalist for the Nikkei in 1994. You were appointed as chief correspondent for Germany in 2007. You transferred to Berlin and stayed there up until you moved to London to your current position in 2017. You have published numerous interviews with various European heads of states, with governments. You have published articles, books, and of course, academic papers. Furthermore, you are lecturing at Freie Universität in Berlin, and you graduated in economics from Keio University, and you also hold a master's degree in politics and post-war history in Germany. And to introduce Ms. Nicole Bastian, as a Koblenz native, you have been excited for and inspired by Asia ever since you took part in a China study group in high school. And after completing East Asian studies with a focus on economics in Duisburg and Kyoto, you accomplished a traineeship at the Deutsche Presseagentur DPA. After that, you worked as an editor in the DPA business department in Hamburg and as economics reporter in Berlin. In 2002, so 20 years ago, you moved to Handelsblatt, and for 5 years you also wrote as a Tokyo correspondent about the economy, politics in Japan, in South Korea, and in North Korea. Since 2014, you have been responsible for foreign affairs at Handelsblatt in Düsseldorf. And if I may add, we are also proud to say that this year, 2021, you have been elected to our DJW board as well. So without further ado, I suggest we dive into the topic in our three levels of perspectives. And first and foremost, I would like to ask Ms. Bastian and Dr. Akagawa on level 1, our inward look, for your perspective and for your observations on the elections themselves. And maybe with a little add and the question, did anything unexpected happen to you within the elections and with the afterwards talks up until today? So maybe we start with Ms. Bastian. Nicole, may I ask you to open the floor?
Yes, hello. It's an honor to be here, and I see some of you in the audience and know that there's much knowledge gathered here. So I hope I can contribute with something there. Well, yeah, my part for the beginning is to do a little wrap up on the German developments. 6 weeks ago, we had the parliamentary elections, as most of you know, and the Social Democrats won, and at the moment we're in the midst of the coalition talks for a three-party coalition with the Green Party and the Liberal Party. Has been very smooth compared to the situation 4 years ago. But what we see now, tomorrow is the deadline for the results of the 22 working groups they have created. And we see now first frustration coming up, especially with the Green Party. And the question will remain if they can keep their timeline. They want to have the government starting second week of December. I'm not sure if that will happen, and I think it's not really a drama if not, but I think we can all be pretty optimistic that the new three-party coalition will start their job sometime in December or January, and that's a pretty good development, because when we see when we remember the mood before the German election, there was especially in abroad, there was this fear of never stopping ongoing coalition talks because we won't have a ruling majority at the moment. It doesn't look too bad though, and that would be my last question before I hand over to Shogo-san. Though key problems are not yet solved, and financing the path in the next years to come with pension, with pensions and other fiscal challenges is not yet solved.
Thank you, Nicole-san. 日本の皆さん、こんばんは und guten Tag für die von Kontinent Europa und Vereinigtes Königreich. Thank you for attending this conference. Let me introduce myself a little bit. My first gateway to Germany dates back 40 years ago, on the end of 70s. Because my family moved at that time to Frankfurt. I went to the normal German elementary school. It's a Grundschule. Since then, I traveled between Germany and Japan for 40 years. I was a German correspondent. I did my postgraduate and PhD in Germany. So I live now in London, which we have European headquarters, but I believe that Germany is the most important country for Japan in Europe, also for Nikkei. And this year, German and Japan, as Pomsel-san already and the Nicole already said, just held both general elections at the same time, and also 160 years anniversary. And last week, German naval frigate Bayern visited Japan. It was the, I think, first time a German warship was called in Japanese port in 20 years. It's an epoch-making topic maybe we will discuss on third pillar. And it's great honor to have such opportunity to discuss German-Japanese relationship in this timing with Nicole. And regarding an election in Japan, last months, which Liberal Democrats secured single majority, I can observe two things. What first is a change of the Prime Minister from Hawk means Abe and Suga, to Dove means Kishida. And this creates a kind of de facto change of government. Despite the both or three prime minister from LDP are. And the second sign is returning to the 1950 years system, so-called 1955 years system. That means strong ruling party. It means LDP and weak left-wing opposition. So which was a similar political structure between 1950s to 1990s in Japan. And regarding to analyzing the voters, I think in Germany, young people are tending to vote more not two major parties. It means for Greens or for FDP. But in Japan, young people are tending to vote LDP, especially young and men are tending to vote LDP, and left-wing oppositions are supported from elderly people. That means it's my analysis, but means maybe it shows some kind of conservativeness in Japanese society, despite of globalization, despite wages are stagnating, or part-time job increasing, but people are somehow satisfied with their situation and the status quo, despite having some anxiety for their future. Kishida himself is dove and moderate, but backed from old-fashioned senior in the LDP like Abe or Aso. It's partly historical revisionist, but I think Kishida could bring some fresh wind to the Japanese politics, but I don't expect such kind of huge structural changes. But no major reforms, but nothing, terrible either. He's some kind of man of compromise, and everybody in LDP can live with him. So looking ahead of Japanese politics, I have already spoken a lot with Japanese politics on both sides. Some say it's the transitional or the provisional government, but I don't underestimate Kishida cabinet, because if I see the upper house election, it will be planned next summer, 2022. I don't see a huge risk of defeat of LDP. And if I see 2023, Japan take over the presidency of G7. And it means, according to Japanese mentality in politics, I think a Japanese political party avoids political dispute or conflict, while such kind of very, very presentive international conference. So G7 is very important for Japanese politics. So they don't make any conflict during the G7. So that means, take all into account, it's likely that Kishida can hold its government at least until summer 2023 or beyond. So that means it's very interesting to see. It means Scholz will be host G7 next year. Germany will be take chair in 22 and Japan 23. What kind of communications will be held in 22 and 23 as both chairs of G7 and the pillar of democratic champs. So maybe Nicole-san, could you explain me or view what can be very important topic for German government in 22 next year? Can form maybe a Scholz a stable government with 3 coalition parties? That is my question also as a journalist.
Well, yeah, I was about to ask you a question, but I'm going to try to answer yours first.
Okay.
Well, I think I'm really optimistic that this time the 3-party coalition could work. But we will see. I mean, the real test will start next week when we have the main coalition talks and the 3 or 4 weeks going on, and to see if they find a common ground where each party is satisfied. And I think at the moment the Greens are really debating, and but I mean that's part of the game, and I'm pretty optimistic that we will see a government. The key question is how much fresh wind this government will really bring, because of course with 3 parties you have to move on a compromise ground, and this is already starting, and a lot of promises will be broken. We have to be sure about that. So we will see change. They had this principal agreement before they started their working group rounds, and we saw already minimum wage increase, the principal promise not to increase taxes, etc. Those are the common grounds. And now the key question will be not if they can govern. I'm pretty sure this will happen, but how much change can they bring? And I think what we saw in Germany is that we are in a need of digital reforms in public space, of education improvements, and the pension system. I mean, that so far it looks like they will postpone a real reform in the pension system. That remains to be seen as well. I think you'll see Olaf Scholz as head of the government next year, and he will be able to host a G7 event, and the German government will be operational and functional. The key question is how much improvement can they bring? And that would bring me to Japan. I'm sometimes still at a loss to understand what Prime Minister Kishida really stands for, because he promised before the election, we saw things that at the moment, I mean, even his wording has changed. If I look at fiscal policy, for example. So for me, it's hard to understand what changes I can expect from a Kishida government. And I think it would have been nice and interesting to see what a Kono government would have brought concerning changes in the government. What's your opinion on that?
You mean Kono Taro, the reformer? Yes. I don't think that he will not play a huge role in the Kishida cabinet. It's neither Ko or Koizumi for next generation. To prevent the power of Kono and the Koizumi, the old-fashioned senior in LDP chose Kishida as its representative, right? So I already, it's the Kishida is man, the LDP can live with him, from ultra-national conservative to moderate politicians. As you know, it's the LDP is a kind of mixture from in German perspective, from AfD to CDU, right, or even to SPD. So it's in German word it's a Sammelbecken, so vielleicht. So it means that Kishida is standard in the middle, but Kishida has not. I think he has a lot of my colleagues in political departments said he has changed. So he has now his opinion, and he know what he should do, but he takes a lot of concern or a negotiation with backyard in LDP. And otherwise, he can't hold his cabinet as long as he wants. So at first, he will concentrate to win this election next upper house. Then maybe he will have his color. But I don't expect such kind of structural reform as Kono or Koizumi want. This is, I think that's kind of generation change will not happen in LDP. That's my expectation.
Maybe to shift a little to Germany and to build the bridge on to our next level of perspectives. And as Nicole said, I remember a certain selfie that has been taken like 6 weeks ago with the political parties having the exploratory talks. And there was a little like a fresh wind, and the readers and the media, of course, the public had the feeling or could get the feeling that there are a lot of negotiations going on, a lot of new things are being thought of or being tried to be established. And now the situation changed a little to maybe more a scramble of power. Nobody knows just yet which ministries are being positioned by whom. And I think one of the most important positions of ministry is the Ministry of Finance. Also looking at the ECB, looking at Deutsche Bundesbank, Maastricht criteria being discussed in Europe. How would you assess the political position of forming the Ministry of Finance being very relevant for Europe's and, of course, for the German-Japanese relations?
I think that I know that German elections have focused mainly on environmental issues and the finance policy. And of course, for example, German stance of finance policy is essential in a financial market, especially. And the environmental policy, especially in climate change, could very important for Japan because German idea may eventually become standard in EU and a benchmark for international society. But what was disappointing for me was that was not many discussions, much discussion about foreign policy on security policy in the election and even in coalition talk. Only on European policy and transatlantic policy was discussed or paper or issued in this paper and no word about Asian policy over Indo-Pacific. So I hope to have a more discussion about international role of Germany. And obviously, I'm sorry to say, but the German voters have not very interested about this topic, more interested about the climate change and the financial policy. But I think that Germany is not longer Germany for before 20 years. Is now the leader of the EU, and I think Germany should discuss more the international role of Germany, I think. What do you think, Nicole-san?
Well, two thoughts on that. The finance ministry is really crucial because it's an integral part of the European policy the German government will take. And the problem is that the Liberal Democratic Party, the FDP, they have to claim the ministry, but they, of course, are the most their public stance is tending to austerity, and this. I mean, we all saw the Stieglitz op-ed last week, so it's really an international and important decision who gets which party gets the finance ministry. And on the other hand, the Green Party has to claim it as well, because so far they really haven't made their points. And if the finance ministry goes to the Liberal Democrats, well, then all the major investments into environmental topics will be hard to get through. So this will be one major battleground in the weeks to come, and it's of utmost international importance. Yeah. Also, I mean, we see on the EU level the CO2 border tax and how this tax impacts companies abroad, for example, also Japanese companies. So the international implications are pretty important. And I agree totally with you, Shogo, that foreign policy was not enough of a topic in the election, and also not now. I mean, we have 22 working groups in the coalition talks, and only one working group 20 is discussing foreign policy, and this is in a package with defense policy and development policy. So a lot to talk about there, and I think the main topic there will be probably the stance towards Russia and China. So we will have an Asian component in there, but to define it in a positive way, with which countries do we want to strengthen our relationship? These steps have not been yet taken by the new coalition parties.
You just said about the ties of Asian-German relations. So maybe I will, my aspect as a from Scholz-Kishida era, I a little bit express my opinions because I'm just preparing an article about the relations, Japanese-German relations. I think there is a tailwind and headwind, both sides are negative and positive. Because as you told already, there's no such kind of huge interest from German side to strengthen ties to Asia. But I think there's more headwinds regarding our relations, maybe also for DJW, because it's not very supportive on politics. Because if I look back on Merkel's 16 years, the relation towards Japan was mostly carried from CDU, CSU, not from SPD. So Merkel herself was not very often in Japan, as you know, more in China. The symbolic was she was not present in Japan between 2008 and 15, almost 7 years. I think she was in 2008 in Hokkaido, G8, and the 7 years absent, and in 2015 in Japan, because she has to hold G7 in Schloss Elmau, so she wanted to invite Abe on. But during this absence of Merkel, several politicians in conservative camp was made contributions for Japanese relations. For example, Christian Wolff, a Bundespräsident, was very pro-Japan, or Volker Kauder, Fraktionsvorsitzender. I think it's called Chair of Parliament, right? In English, yeah. Or, for example, Mark Hauptmann from Thuringen. He was a CDU politician, the only one politician who has experience in studying in Japan. But Volker Kauder has not candidate anymore. And Mark Hauptmann was involved as so-called mask scandal. And for me, it's a regrettable, for example, minister level, Peter Altmaier, the Minister for Economy, because he chose Japan and Indonesia for his first offshore trip to Asia in 2018, not China. So at that time, I accompanied his trip to Asia a week. And he told me repeatedly that Germans have to seek balance between China and other part of Asia. So it means I think it's the idea of already Indo-Pacific at that time, 2018. But it's not unclear in SPD and Greens how to handle with Japan compared to CDU. And the second, I think, headwinds from new ruling party means, for example, Rolf Nütznig, the chair of parliament of SPD. He was the chair of Japanese German parliamentary group, but he is a pacifist, as you know, and the longtime champion of arm reduction. So it means he's not very supportive, for example, to send warship to Indo-Pacific. So Green Party is always interesting for us, a kind of topic of Fukushima or a comfort woman in Japan during the World War II. I think it's legitimate, but it's very uncomfortable for the revisionists in the LDP. And I'm sorry to say that to German audience, but I mean, especially in the Greens Party, is German politicians are very outspoken and direct. They have not such kind of British politeness or Japanese brightness. And I like this Berlin attitude. So also say it's if they say I don't like this, it's don't like. It's say no, it's no, right? I don't have to scrutinize the background as I always do in Japanese or here in United Kingdom. But I think some more of old-fashioned in Japan, it's not very, supportive, such kind of attitude, German attitude from Green Party. But I see also such kind of tailwinds. Tailwinds means international politics, more tensions between with China. So that means more interest to Indo-Pacific, more caution of China. That means more ties to democratic champs, to Japan, Taiwan, or Australia for German topics. I remember that the beginning phase of Merkel Abe was also very difficult because of the Japanese loose finance policy or very accommodated monetary policy or its energy policy or its revisionist stance on history aspect. But after a couple of years, they have agreed to or to have new partnership because of the Trump, because of the tension to China. So I think that I hope that international situation brings Japan and Germany closer also in the next government. What do you think?
That will be very, very nice movement, of course. We've covered a lot now of how Japan is being perceived in Germany and how the strategy of involving Japan or closing the ties to Japan from the German perspectives. How's the other way around? How's Germany playing a part in the new governments in Japan? How are they perceiving Europe, the talks right now? How is it covered by the media? Is it like on the upper end of possibilities, or are they as curious as we are? Which part is Germany playing in the new Japanese governments?
Is it at all, Shogo? playing a
maybe you could start, I think.
I'm actually I mean there's this interest in the European Union, and I think what Shogo mentioned, the Indo-Pacific strategy, that's really a common ground where Japan and Germany, or Japan and the EU can work closer together, and I think it will happen. I mean, you just mentioned the first military joint exercise in 20 years. That's a start, and I think this common interest could be a good point to focus on and to improve the relationship. It's not a bad relationship or anything. It's not, but it's not as lively as one could imagine, perhaps, or as euphoric as one could imagine. I think it's a good opportunity as well that next year we will have the Asia Business Conference of the German Community in Tokyo.
Yeah.
So that will, by nature, give the new German government a focus point next year on Japan, and I think that a new foreign minister might as well be a chance for new, more vibrant relations with from Germany to Japan.
Yes, I'm very interested in how can get a tie to Taiwan from German perspective. So it means when we see the situation in Indo-Pacific, China is the essential topic, and if we see China, there is only two topics. One is the Olympic Games 2022, who will be attending the opening ceremony, and how many European countries will join to so-called diplomatic boycott, right? I think Kishida will closely observe the attitude of European countries and the United States, who will be joined it. Then he will decide. He will not isolate it in G7. But second thing is how should we keep the Taiwan? The Hong Kong is, I have to say carefully, but de facto lost. And now French or European Parliament sent its delegation to Taipei. And what's your opinion? Should German new parliament send a delegation to Taiwan?
I think it should always be possible to send a delegation to Taiwan, and governments already did it. I mean, other European governments, as you mentioned. I mean, the US sent a delegation health delegation to Taiwan. I think for European countries, it will be very interesting to see if they are really integrated in the strategy in the Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, and on the Taiwan issue. I think what we saw between the US and Australia and the French reaction of being rudely left out is something which also in Germany is a point of consideration and of a certain skepticism. Europe concentrates now on this new focus area, Indo-Pacific, but Europe is tiny in the Indo-Pacific, and it's I think the fear is a little bit being left out, and that countries as Japan, as Australia, as India, and as the US will form a relationship where the EU is not really integrated, and I think that's a really important development we'll see next year.
And there I would like to anchor with my next question, because we have already reached the level 3, the global perspective, of course, which is always an issue or aspects we have to discuss. Nicole, you said that Europe has to be aware of the many ties, politically, economically tied in Asia, and not only in Indo-Pacific, but of course with China, with the US, with Australia, New Zealand, with the UK. Europe tends to be left out in all these agreements and partnership agreements, free trade agreements, etc. Is there any chance for the next German government to regain the strength to be a part in Asia as well, especially, of course, Germany and Japan? Which kind of tools do they have to make themselves heard, to say, here we are a very feasible partner, don't make us be like the third wheel on the car here?
Well, I think we have to first perhaps remember that there was a success story if we talk about free trade agreements. The EU-Japan free trade agreement is a huge success, actually. And I think it will be important to see if it can be deepened or broadened to other areas. So that was an accomplishment in the last years, I'd say. And now Europe is a free trade area in itself, of course. But if we see now RCEP is developing and then CPTPP, UK will join, and so there will be Europe has to have a strategy how to integrate with other Asian countries. But that's not true for Japan, because the EU-Japan trade deal is a really successful one. What's your view, Shogo?
Yes, I mean, trade policy is essential for Japan, I think it's for Japan and EU-Japan trade agreement have no such kind of background of security policies. It's pure economic interest, right? But for Japan, I think it's now very difficult to separate security policy and trade policy, especially if we see from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. And as you know, at first, UK have sent signals of interest to join it, because UK is now, and after Brexit, they have to show the flag in Indo-Pacific. And then China and Taiwan applied for it. That means I think that the UK will be first joined to TPP, then Japan, UK, and Australia have to decide whether China and Taiwan could join the TPP or not. It's very, very difficult question for us. So, and I think that Japan has not, consistent policy to China, despite attention in security policy, because Japan is the only one country who has not attended a sanction to China in G7 in this spring. So it means the Japanese company do not want some kind of trouble with the important trading policy. And maybe in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had a fear if Japan were imposed to sanctions, Chinese Communist Party will play with historical issues like a Nanking massacre or something like that, or Japanese boycott. So I think that my opinion is Japan should apologize in the past, but they have to show a firm stance against the authoritarian countries like Belarus, Russia, Myanmar, or China. And as a journalist, I have to say we have to stand for democracy and press freedom. But so far, Japanese government policy toward such kind of Russia and China is not consistent.
But I think that if we talk about the CPTPP, it was actually, if Japan was always a little bit reluctant to take this role as a regional leader, I'd say. So there has been a power vacuum, and I think CPTPP was an exemption, and a very positive exemption from that, because if it were not for the Japanese government, we wouldn't have seen the CPTPP taking form when the US left under the Trump government. So there was, so it will be interesting how Japan will react to this very delicate situation that Taiwan and China applied to become a member. But in the process of forming and keeping CPTPP starting, Japan played a really positive role, was my impression.
Yes, that's correct. Until now, it's a very positive development, but now it's an aspect of the security policies there. Yeah. So I guess Japanese government will try to negotiate as long as possible, extending, and not to take a decision in short term. Maybe hoping that the China will lose some interest to join it.
But that's really interesting because it's a parallel that to the AUKUS deal between Australia and the US, that you say we should not underestimate the strong linkage now in Asia and also for Japan between economic and military or security issues. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and my concern is because, as you mentioned, it's a two-pillar security policy pillars, one AUKUS and one Quad. It's both Anglo-Saxon countries, right? So for Japan, for a long time, globalization means a kind of Anglo-Saxon nation, and as you know, the influence from the US and UK is so strong in Japan, so it means less to the continental European countries. So that is my concern. But if we see the situation in Europe, the center of European is not anymore between France and the United Kingdom. It's between Paris and Berlin. So I think Japan has to realize this fact that Europe is not anymore Europe until 1990s. So that means Japan has to more focus on bilateral relations to Brussels, Paris, or Berlin, not only to Washington, London.
And we have now discussed a lot of foreign policy, of course, a lot of defense and security political movements. And with our pre-talk that we had, you also raised the issue of course, climate change, Energiewende, which is a global issue, an aspect that we now finally, I might say, come to address as the Earth, as a very international governments. And Ms. Schilling, she asked a question also with regard to this topic. I know we are opening a very large and not ending barrel here, but there has been published energy strategy and net zero goals in the new governments. And what is the term of Energiewende in Japan and in Germany? How are they, this very pressing issue, will it be addressed more aggressively, more consistently? In Germany, we have the Green Party having a huge success with the election this year. How is it in Japan?
I think it's the climate exchange will be day by day, I think, more main focus topic on Japanese government. But to be honest, it's fair to say, I think Japanese government have not invested much time in climate change, and also for, I would say, human rights. And the perception in Europe is Japan has high technology, but not a leader of the climate exchange so far. Also, if I talk with a lot of European diplomats, They say Japan is only interested to security policy in Asia, but not so much, human rights topic in the China or in Russia, right? So I think that should be changed in Kishida. And one sign that under Kishida, and maybe it's the beginning from Suga, they now slowly started to set agenda of climate change to zero. And for human rights, yesterday in a press conference announced that Kishida will set an advisor for human rights for him. That is Mr. Nakatani, the former defense minister, and he will charge for human rights, right? I think it's a small change, but it changed. So I think, my opinion as a journalist, Japan should show the leadership of democracy, of rule of law, and the respect for human rights, and act as a leader of climate change. That is our responsibility. And I would say we are sharpeners, and we can do it.
Do you have any?
Opinions? Yeah.
Nicole, do you have anything to add, or?
Well, that would of course be another area where closer cooperation would be very fruitful. I mean, we have the discussion at the moment within the European Union, very ambitious climate goals, I would say, but still in the making. I mean, the question if nuclear energy is green energy or not is not yet solved and is being discussed. Then the huge investments we will have in Europe via the recovery fund. We have to see if they really bring this transition into more sustainable societies and economies as planned. But I mean, we see now the COP26 in Glasgow, and but this is definitely an area where Germany and Japan, or the EU and Japan, could work closer together and link their technologies closer in order to prevent more climate change.
That is very close to a very nice and positive thinking closing statement.
Oh, that was supposed to be a closing statement, but
it's perfect. All is very perfect. So I'm addressing my last question to you. Will Ms. Merkel hold a New Year's speech this year? What's your estimation?
You should answer, Nicholson.
That's tricky. It might. I mean, the three-party coalition will do their utmost to prevent that. I'm not sure if they. I mean, if they will be ready in time. If they are not ready in time, I would say Angela Merkel will hold it together with Scholz. And they will do, like with the G20 meeting, they will do a two-person speech combo. What's your view, Shogo?
What do you think, Shogo?
I hope that Scholz will take over in the next year. And otherwise, I mean, New Year is the start of German G7 presidency. So German should have new face to the world. That is not Merkel.
That's true. That's true. Definitely a common point there.
That is very, very nice. I agree with you that we should take the new wind to the new year as well. And what could be nicer as a statement for that, to have the New Year's speech by whomever follows Ms. Merkel. And with that, our time is unfortunately, very sad to say, already coming to an end. We have scheduled an hour for this premiere dialogue of DJW Spot On, and I'm very happy to be having you and take the last 2 minutes to thank you very much for your time and to thank you for sharing your expertise. And I feel like we could have talked so many more about climate change, about carbon neutrality, about many criteria. But I would like to pick up Nicole's last statement that it's always room for improvement, that there is room for a very closer German-Japanese business relation, exchange, for cooperation on so many levels. And we see our topic, our issues as DJW of our Nichidoku Sangyo Kyokai as carrying the spark of enthusiasm to the future and maybe even to ignite it with new elements. And this little spark of interest, of enthusiasm that has caught fire more than 160 years ago, that got the feeling of being dimmed somewhat over the last couple of years, but it most certainly never extinguished. And we hope to be building up the 160 years of friendship, of partnership together with you. And with that, we invite you, of course, to be a part of this enthusiasm and to become a part of our business association, of our DJW, to get involved, to get engaged. We're very much looking forward to welcoming you as a member of our association, because it's, on the one side, it's our firm belief that politics can give a certain background, can give a certain and a very stable framework of cooperation, but it's always the task of society and of our bilaterally active institutions to fill this framework with very personal stories and with life. And with that, I would like you to engage, to be confident, to stay curious, to stay active, and to thank you very much for your participation today. Join us, and I'm very sure we will see each other again very soon.